There was a man who believed that love could be measured in hours of work. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would quietly leave the house. The streets were still half asleep, and the air carried that soft, cool silence that only existed before the world began rushing again. Inside the house, his family was still dreaming. His wife would sometimes wake for a brief moment when she heard the door close. She never stopped him. She never asked him to stay. She simply watched the empty space beside her, and then closed her eyes again. His daughter, still small enough to believe that every day lasted forever, rarely saw him in the morning. To her father was someone who existed mostly at night, a quiet figure who came home tired, with a gentle smile and heavy footsteps. He worked long hours, sometimes 10, sometimes 12, sometimes even more. He told himself it was necessary. Every late night, every missed meal, every moment of exhaustion, it all had a purpose. He was building something, a better life, a safer future, a life where his family would never have to worry. When his daughter was younger, she used to wait for him at the door. She would sit on the floor, holding a small toy, her eyes fighting sleep. Every time she heard a sound outside, she would stand up quickly, her face lighting up with hope. "Daddy," she would whisper, and when he finally arrived, she would run into his arms, wrapping herself around him as if she had been waiting forever. Those moments were small, quiet, easy to miss, but they were everything to her. As time passed, those nights became fewer. Not because he came home earlier, but because she stopped waiting. She began to fall asleep before he returned. Her small hands no longer held toys near the door. Her footsteps no longer rushed toward him. At first, he didn't notice. His days were too full, his mind too occupied with numbers, responsibilities, and endless tasks. He believed he still had time to rest later, time to be present later, time to make up for everything later. Weekends became workdays, dinner conversations became shorter. Laughter inside the house became quieter. His wife started eating alone more often. His daughter started speaking less at the table, and still he told himself the same thing. This is for them. One evening, he came home a little earlier than usual. Not early enough to see the sunset, but early enough to notice something different. The house felt quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but something deeper, something that felt like distance. His daughter was sitting on the couch, holding a book. She looked up when he entered. For a brief second, their eyes met. There was no running, no excitement, no small voice calling out to him. Just a simple, polite smile. "Hi, Dad." It was the first time he felt something he couldn't quite explain. A small pause in his chest, a quiet discomfort. He smiled back, tired but gentle. "Hi." And then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed. He placed his bag down. He loosened his tie. He stepped into the routine he knew so well. He didn't realize it yet, but something important had already begun to change. After that evening, nothing seemed obviously different. The house still stood the same. The routines continued. The clock kept moving forward without hesitation. But something quiet had shifted. He began to notice small details he had once overlooked. His daughter no longer waited for him to start dinner. She ate when her mother called her, not when he came home. Her laughter, once bright and effortless, had become softer, more reserved, almost careful. Sometimes she would glance at him as if she wanted to say something, but then she would look away. He told himself it was normal. Children grow up, they change, they become more independent. That was a good thing, wasn't it? One night, he tried to sit beside her while she was doing homework. "What are you working on?" he asked, his voice gentle but unfamiliar in that moment. She paused, her pencil hovering above the page. "Just school stuff," she replied. He nodded, not knowing what else to say. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. In the past, she would have explained everything, every detail, every small thought, every tiny story. Now her answers were shorter, careful, polite, as if she wasn't sure how much of him was really there. He stayed for a few minutes, watching her write. Then his phone buzzed. Work, always work. He glanced at the screen, hesitated for a second, and then stood up. "I need to take this," he said. She nodded without looking up. "Okay," just one word, simple, empty. He stepped away, already pulled back into the world he understood better. Deadlines, calls, responsibilities. Behind him, the quiet continued. Days turned into weeks. He began coming home earlier once in a while, trying to be present, but presence, he slowly realized, was not something you could turn on like a light. It wasn't just about being there, it was about being known. And somewhere along the way, he had become a stranger in his own home. One weekend, he decided not to work. It felt unusual, almost uncomfortable. He sat in the living room, unsure of what to do with the time he had finally created. His daughter was nearby, watching something on her tablet. He watched her for a moment, noticing how much she had grown. Her face had changed, her expressions were different. There were pieces of her life he had never seen. "Do you want to go out?" he asked suddenly. She looked up, surprised. "Go out?" "Yeah, maybe get something to eat. Or just walk." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope, but it faded quickly. "I already made plans," she said quietly. "With friends?" He nodded, trying to hide the disappointment that caught him off guard. "Of course. That's good." She smiled politely, not the kind of smile that reached her eyes. Later that day, as he sat alone in the quiet house, he began to understand something he had avoided for a long time. Time doesn't wait. Moments don't pause. And love cannot be saved for later. It has to be lived in the small, ordinary moments, the ones he had been too busy to see. And now, sitting in that silence, he started to wonder, how many of those moments were already gone? Forever. The realization didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like a quiet echo that refused to fade. At first, he tried to ignore it. He told himself he was overthinking, that everything was still fine, that there was still time to fix things. But the small moments kept proving him wrong. One evening, he came home and found an old photo lying on the table. It was slightly bent at the corners, as if it had been taken out and looked at many times. In the picture, his daughter was much younger. She was sitting on his shoulders, her arms wrapped around his head, laughing freely. He remembered that day. It had been a Sunday, one of the rare days he didn't work. They had gone to a small park nearby. Nothing special, just a normal day. But in that photo, it looked like everything. He picked it up and stared at it longer than he expected. There was something in that image that felt distant, not just in time, but in feeling. He tried to remember the last time she had laughed like that with him. He couldn't. That night, he knocked on her door. It was a simple action, but it felt strangely unfamiliar. "Can I come in?" he asked. There was a pause before she answered. "Okay." She was sitting at her desk, headphones resting around her neck. He stepped inside, looking around the room. There were new things on the shelves, books he hadn't seen before, small decorations he didn't recognize. Her world had grown, and he hadn't been there to witness it. "I found this," he said, holding up the photo. She glanced at it and smiled faintly. "That was a long time ago." "Yeah," he said softly. "It was." Another silence. Not uncomfortable, but not easy either. "I was thinking," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "maybe we could do something together this weekend." She hesitated. Not long, but long enough. "I'll see," she replied. Not a yes, not a no, just something in between. And somehow that felt heavier than a rejection. He nodded slowly. "Okay." As he turned to leave, she called out softly, "Dad?" He stopped. "Yes?" She looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether to say something important. But then she shook her head. Nothing. He stood there for a second longer, waiting. But the moment passed. "Good night," he said quietly. "Good night." That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every small moment from the past few years, all the dinners he missed, all the conversations he never had, all the times he said, "later." He had always believed he was doing the right thing, working harder, providing more, building a better future. But now, that future felt empty, because the people he was doing it for were slowly moving forward without him. And the hardest part wasn't that they were changing, it was that they had learned how to live without needing him there. For the first time, he felt something deeper than regret. He felt loss, not of money, not of success, but of moments. Moments that had once been within reach, and were now quietly slipping beyond it. The next few days felt different, not because anything around him had changed, but because he had. For the first time in years, he began to pay attention, not just to his work, not just to deadlines or responsibilities, but to the quiet spaces inside his own home. He noticed how his wife moved through the kitchen without asking for help, how she had learned to carry everything on her own. He noticed how his daughter closed her door more often, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in quiet independence. It wasn't distance forced by conflict, it was distance built over time, and that realization stayed with him. One evening, he came home earlier than usual again. This time, he didn't go straight to his phone. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't let work pull him away. Instead, he stood in the living room for a moment, as if he was entering a place he hadn't truly seen in years. His daughter was there, sitting on the floor, flipping through a notebook. He walked closer, slower this time. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up, slightly surprised. "Just drawing." "Can I see?" She hesitated. It was a small pause, but it carried something unspoken. Then she turned the notebook toward him. Inside were sketches, simple at first glance, but full of detail. Some were of places, some were of people. He flipped through a few pages quietly. Then he stopped. There was one drawing that held his attention. It was of a small family, a mother, a child, and an empty space beside them. Not erased, not forgotten, just left blank. He felt something tighten in his chest. "Who's this?" he asked gently, even though he already knew. She shrugged. "Just a drawing." He nodded slowly. He didn't push further. For once, he understood that some things didn't need to be explained to be felt. He closed the notebook carefully and handed it back. "It's really good," he said. She gave a small smile. "Thanks." That night, he didn't return to work. Instead, he sat at the table during dinner. The conversation was quiet at first, unfamiliar, like people learning how to speak to each other again. But he stayed, even when the silence felt uncomfortable, even when he didn't know what to say, because he finally understood. Leaving had been easy. Staying required effort. Days later, he made a decision. Not a big announcement, not something dramatic, just a quiet choice. He started saying no to some things, extra hours, unnecessary meetings, late night calls. It wasn't easy. It felt like stepping away from something he had relied on for so long. But for the first time, he began to ask himself a different question. What am I losing by continuing like this? And the answer was no longer something he could ignore. One evening, he knocked on his daughter's door again. "Do you still have plans this weekend?" he asked. She looked up from her desk. "No, not really." He nodded, trying to stay calm. "Would you like to go out? Just us." This time, the pause was different, shorter, softer. "Okay," she said. Just one word. But it felt like something opening, slowly, carefully. Not everything was fixed. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, something had begun to come back. The weekend arrived quietly. There were no big plans, no expensive places, no carefully arranged schedule, just time. Something he once believed he didn't have. They chose a small cafe not too far from home. It wasn't special. Just a simple place with soft music and sunlight coming through the windows. At first, the conversation felt unfamiliar. He asked simple questions. She gave simple answers. "How's school?" "It's okay." "Anything interesting lately?" "Not really." He nodded, listening more than speaking. In the past, he might have tried to fill the silence. Now, he let it breathe. Slowly, something began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gently. She started talking a little more. About a class she liked, about a friend who made her laugh, about a teacher who told long, boring stories. He smiled at the small details. They weren't important to the world, but they were everything to her. And for the first time in a long time, he was there to hear them. After the cafe, they decided to walk. The afternoon sun stretched their shadows across the pavement. There was no rush, no phone calls, no distractions, just steps, side by side. At one point, she slowed down and looked at him. "Dad?" "Yes?" "You're not busy today?" The question was simple, but it carried years inside it. He shook his head. "No, I'm not." She looked at him for a moment, as if trying to understand something new. Then she smiled, not the polite smile from before, but something softer, something real. I like this, she said. Those three words stayed with him, more powerful than anything he had heard in years. That night back at home, the house felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just warmer. Dinner was still simple. The space was still the same, but something had shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. As the days passed, he continued trying, not by making big promises, but by showing up, sitting at the table, listening without rushing, staying even when it felt unfamiliar. There were still moments of distance, still times when silence returned, because some things, once lost, don't come back all at once. They return slowly, if they return at all. One evening, as he passed by her room, he noticed the door was slightly open. Inside, she was drawing again. He paused for a moment, then gently knocked. Can I come in? She looked up and smiled. Yeah. This time there was no hesitation. He stepped inside, sitting beside her. On the page, there was another drawing. A small family, a mother, a child. And now, a figure standing beside them. Not perfect, not detailed, but present. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because sometimes the most important things aren't said. They are simply lived. And for the first time, he understood. Providing for his family was important, but being there, truly being there, was what they needed all along. If this story made you pause and reflect, take a moment to look at your own life. Who are you working for? And are you truly there for them? Don't wait for later, because the moments that matter most are happening right now. If you enjoy slow, meaningful English stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more gentle journeys through real life.